Welcome into the EMA Online Postgame Podcast. Mason Voth and Alec Bussey here with you from EMA Online over at Rivals. You can go check everything out over there. A lot of good coverage afterwards. Alec with a fresh piece this morning about Will Howard after he came through and he silenced the doubters, the haters, the whoever's, and got carried off the field by his teammates. So a very special day. And I said last night on Twitter, I think that K-State quarterbacks possess the two best pictures in college football this season for everything that they've been through. Adrian Martinez with his bow and Norman exercising all those demons and, kind of silencing all the people that were critical of his play at Nebraska. And then Will Howard with the shot of him getting carried off by his teammates and surrounded by all the fans on the field after the game. Because the Wildcats won 48-0 over a top 10 team, which a lot of numbers can be thrown out there about that. The one that I guess I think is the most significant, it's the first time, or it's the worst loss ever by a top 10 team against a team that was ranked below them. So there had been worse losses by a top 10 team, but any of those losses had come to either the number 1 or number 2 team in the country. And a bunch of them look like they were like Army in the 1920s. So this was a significant win. Oklahoma State, probably their worst day ever under Mike Gundy. And he, after the game, had, some words for it, but it was kind of how I expected. He was calm. I think they got beat so bad that he was just calm. Like there was no reason to just lash out at everything. You just kind of sit there and go, we just got our ass kicked. Wow. Okay. Whatever. So all beautiful things to kind of hit on there. And before I let Alec hop in here, at some point today, because I think that it's only right that I expose myself, I will go through and I will read all of my negative tweets towards Will Howard over the last 2 years.
That's fun. I'm down for that.
And see just what is said. I think there's going to be one day that's positive in there, and it's going to be it's probably going to be from the Oklahoma State game last season, because I actually thought he played pretty well. But then, tough stuff happened. So it is what it is. What were your thoughts of yesterday's game, Alec? 48-0. Did you expect – well, you picked Oklahoma State to win, so only one of us got that right. Did you think that K-State had any chance to win that game by 48 points starting today?
No, I think I tweeted at some point during the game that, Kansas State winning would not have been a surprise, but Kansas State winning by such a large margin was kind of shocking. I don't think anyone expected Kansas State to come in and just utterly dominate Oklahoma State. I had a few people text me after the game, like, holy smokes, that's incredible. Like, how did that happen? And my analysis was pretty simple. It was like pure and utter domination is what Kansas State did yesterday from the opening drive to the final whistle. The way Kansas State played was the most complete team performance that I have seen from this Kansas State team. And quite honestly with you, Mason, it's probably the most complete team performance I've seen out of a game since 2018 Iowa beat Illinois 63-0. And that was, just incredible what Kansas State did yesterday to Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State had 217 yards of total offense, just 163 passing yards, only 54 rushing yards. And I know it's an offense that isn't predicated on being able to run the ball overly effectively, but just 54 rushing yards is incredible. Oklahoma State was 5 of 15 on third down. They ran just 63 total plays on offense. They averaged just 3.4 yards per play, 1.8 yards per rush. It's just they didn't reach the red zone a single time. They had just 24 minutes of possession. They had 3 turnovers. That was just
I was
utter domination.
I was fascinated when you mentioned in the game. It was probably like late third quarter, and you were looking at drives up until Oklahoma State's final drive of the game that ended in an interception. They only had one drive that lasted over 3 minutes on Saturday. It was their second drive of the game, and it resulted in a punt. Meanwhile, K-State, they had a couple of drives that went over 3 minutes. Their longest was a 6.5-minute drive right before the end of the second quarter where they got the touchdown to Deuce Vaughn. but they also found ways to score quick. They were very balanced yesterday. It was a total performance that they had. They end up not scoring points on only, let's see, 4 of their drives. I'm not going to count the kneel downs, as you shouldn't, but they go touchdown, touchdown, punt, punt, touchdown, 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 punt, field goal, punt, touchdown. That's an impressive day, especially on the back of Will Howard, who found out 25 minutes before the game that he was going to be the starter.
Yeah, for Will Howard to come in and have the game that he did, that's an incredible performance. His quarterback rating was 159.6, and I know his completion percentage wasn't great. He completed just 57% of his passes, so he went 21 of 37. But he threw for 296 yards, 224 of them come in the first half. All 4 of his touchdown passes come in the first half. In K-State really kind of took their foot off the gas in the second half because they were up 35-0, so they were trying to run clock. They were giving the ball to Deuce Vaughn. They gave the ball to DJ Giddens a few times in the second half as well to kind of keep that clock running and just kind of get home scot-free without having to worry about Oklahoma State coming back into the game. And just the way Will Howard played, the conviction that he played with in the first half, and I think that you saw confidence in the coaching staff and Will Howard. The most glaring example of that is 4th and 10 on their very first drive after Deuce Vaughn's called for a false start, was back to the 38-yard line, was going to be 4th and 5. They're going to go for it. On 4th and 5, they decided to keep the offense on the field on 4th and 10, and Will Howard rolls out to his left because of pressure and hits Cade Warner on a pretty similar play to last week where throws a beautiful ball in the front corner of the end zone. Cade's able to haul it in for a touchdown. K-State goes up 7-0. And there's a few other impressive throws that Will Howard had. I thought the touchdown pass to Phillip Brooks was an impressive throw up the seam. Obviously, Brooks was wide open, so it was pretty easy for Brooks to kind of haul it in, but it was a good read from Howard. I thought the 41-yard touchdown on the screen pass to Cade Warner was kind of a death sentence in a way. It made it 28-0, and with K-State being at home and just 9 minutes left in the second quarter, I was like, okay, that's a pretty dramatic jump out, pound your opponent. Like, it felt like
if you're Oklahoma State and you're giving up a 41-yard touchdown to Cade Warner on a screen pass, at that point you should probably go, this is not our day. Cade Warner has made a ton of plays and he deserves a ton of credit, but like Chris Kleiman joked about it after the game, is like, yeah, Cade, he would tell you he's a playmaker. Like, Cade Warner should not be blazing past you for 41 yards for a touchdown, and he got away from everybody. It was Colin Klein has been criticized a lot this year. He was dang good yesterday, and if you go back and watch some of the critical plays in that game, Brock Huard does a really good job on the TV broadcast of kind of pointing out what K-State did, but he was great about getting guys in the right spot. And then whether it was on screens or whatever else they did, K-State was phenomenal yesterday in a lot of that. They executed every element of the game perfectly.
Yeah, and I thought the touchdown to Deuce Vaughn right before halftime was an incredible play call too, because they failed on back-to-back quarterback sneaks at literally like inside the 1-yard line at the goal. And a lot of people are, QB sneak that, give it to your running back on a halfback dive and try and get an inch and get into the end zone. And K-State did it twice, and it didn't work either time. And the second time, Howard tried to leap over the pile. And I'm not a huge fan of your quarterback doing that just because I think ball security issues become an issue. But I really love the third down call where they motioned out of what appeared to be a third QB sneak from the inch line. And I wouldn't have had a problem with another QB sneak because I think at some point you're going to push it in.
Some of those spots were a little questionable too. Malik Knowles gets down to the 1-yard line, and he's like sitting in the end zone. And then the ball is like at the very full 1 yard away from the end zone, if not more. Watching back, I was like, those are kind of interesting, but yes, I get what you're saying there.
But I thought the touchdown pass to Deuce was a great ball. Like, put it in a spot where only Deuce could get it. There was no chance that an Oklahoma State corner was going to be able to jump that route, pick it, and Deuce makes a hell of a play on the ball, dives for it, and is able to haul it in. And at that point, K-State's up 35-0. I was like, okay, this game's over. I thought the game was potentially over at 28-0. And at one point, I said to you, was it in the second half where if I said to you, I don't feel like Oklahoma State's going to score?
Yeah, you did.
And that was right, obviously, to toot my own horn for a second, but I forget when exactly I told you that. It probably was at some point in the third quarter, but
it was earlier than I was comfortable in saying that. And now again, part of this probably goes to I've seen a lot more K-State football than you, and having that attachment to it of being an alum probably just, waiting like, something bad's going to happen at some point. Like, when's that shoe going to drop? So I was cautiously optimistic the entire game. But then basically the way that Oklahoma State ended and started the first and second half, it was like, okay, they're going to roll over, and they had like nothing in them to do anything.
Yeah, I think once, and it's funny that you say it that way because I feel like on Thursday in his media availability, Joe Kleinerman kind of made a comment to this about being back home. And he said, when we were up 28-10 on TCU last week, I think if that game was at home, I don't know if TCU has a fight to come back in that game because of the crowd. And in a way that seems kind of cliche to say, and he wasn't making an excuse for them losing that game because they were on the road. But what he was kind of saying was Oklahoma State's going to come in here into a tough environment, and if they get down, it's going to be hard for them to come back in the game. Well, they got down real quick, and they never even had a chance because they didn't score a single point. So
yeah, well, you absolutely can't let K-State do what they did yesterday, and that's on the first drive. It's electric plays. They go down the field and score. Very similar, like, and K-State let Tech back into the game, but the fact that that Tech game started with Adrian Martinez ripping off back-to-back giant runs, it's like you're shooting yourselves in the foot already, because not only are you down to start the game, but you've also let this crowd get way into it. And it was the perfect storm for one of the best crowds in a while in Manhattan, because you were gone for 28 days. So K-State had played 2 road games and had a bye week in between everything. Everybody's pissed off from the week before for blowing that lead, and all the what ifs now that really come out of it, where you say, if Adrian was healthy, if Will was healthy, like, tough spot for Jake Rubley to have to actually play for the first time on the road at a top 10 team. Like, everything that played into it. And that was a significant game for K-State, for everything that it met and what was still on the line. And the crowd was great. And Oklahoma State, every single thing that happened in that game, the crowd was into it. They were ready to go. So a lot of credit is deserved to that. And I think, like, Joe Kleinerman's on the spot. Like, everybody says that about their home crowd because that's just what you do in college sports. Like, well, our crowd is great and everything.
We have the best fans in the country.
Yeah. But there are some situations where it's true. And, like, that is one of those cases where I think it was accurate yesterday for K-State, and would have been against TCU. Like, it's going to be tough for anybody that comes in now. So we'll have to see what it looks like next week for Texas. Night game, it'll be kind of rocking and everything, and we'll see how everything moves on from there. But going to be very, very fun. Some of the other notes from the game. First off, when I get into these, the defense plays outstanding yesterday, despite not having Daniel Green in the game, not having Khalid Duke in the first half, and Felix Anudike-Uzomah was getting held on every play. He's banged up, he's limited, and he was still ripping into the Oklahoma State offensive line, which I don't know what like the other ones look like in the league. That might be one of the worst offensive lines in the Big 12, because K-State was only bringing a 3-man rush most of the day, and they were putting Spencer Sanders under serious duress. So that to me, very impressive.
Yeah, I thought the way the defense played yesterday was incredibly impressive. I thought the linebacker play yesterday was incredible too. The way that Nick Allen played, the way that Austin Moore played, they combined for about 13 tackles, and 11 of them were solo tackles. Only one of them had a tackle for loss. Allen was credited with a half tackle for loss. And really, I don't feel like K-State was in the backfield a ton yesterday. They only had 3 total sacks, 6 tackles for loss, which is a pretty solid number, but we've seen them be closer to double digits at times this season. And I thought they played really well, and they kind of were able to overcome Felix not having his greatest game, I guess you could kind of say. He obviously has a sack, and he has a tackle for loss in there as well because of the sack. But I thought that where they played yesterday was they were really solid at getting off the field, obviously. You don't allow a single point, but to go back to what you said a little bit earlier about Oklahoma State's drives, after Oklahoma State's first 2 drives, their second one ended in a punt, and that one took 3 minutes and 6 seconds off the clock. They didn't have a single drive last over 1 minute and 50, or they didn't have another drive last over 2 minutes and 38 seconds until the final one that ended in the interception. And a lot of them too, if you look at it, weren't very long drives. The third drive was 1 play. because it ended in a fumble. The next one was 3 plays, so 3 and out. Then it was an interception, so 2 plays. Then they had a 6-play, 15-yard drive. Then they had a 1-play, -1 yard. That was a knee, so we probably shouldn't count that one. 5-play, 20-yard drive that took 2:27 off the clock on their first drive coming out of halftime. Punt. Then a 3-play, 0 yards, ends in a punt. And they only got into K-State territory, Mason, a few times. I mean, if you really look at it, they got into K-State territory on their first drive, their third drive, and then they got into it again later in the third quarter with about 4:51 left. So it was, I mean, K-State didn't even allow them to get into their, so they won the field possession battle is what I'm trying to say. And I'm not even a big field possession person, but K-State dominated it yesterday because Oklahoma State couldn't even get into their own territory.
Well, and this is another significant thing. So K-State is up 14-0. They just had to punt the ball to Oklahoma State.
Yeah.
And that play where Austin Moore is able to flag down Brennan Presley from behind and force the fumble, like that was the most predictable thing ever in the sense of once the play started to develop and he kept going further downfield, I was thinking in my head, I was like, these are the plays that dudes fumble on because somebody's going to catch him from behind and rip that ball out. And so credit to Austin Moore for making a huge play. And everybody was kind of shocked. The rest probably blew it dead a little bit early. Brennan Mott, I don't know if he knew what to do with the football at that point when he got it. But K-State came away with it. And at that point, like, that's a giant killer for Oklahoma State. And I think that was the first thing that really broke them. And even then, K-State comes out after that and they go 3 and out and they have to punt it back to Oklahoma State. But it didn't really matter at that point.
Such a big momentum swing in the game was, all right, K-State's up 14-0, and it feels like Oklahoma State's going to have to go and score because of the way K-State executed on their first 2 drives, right? Where it was quick, it was a touchdown, and they're up 14-0, right? And then they get a fumble, and it's okay. Now you've got an opportunity to go up 21-0, and you don't. But then the defense continues to hold, and they get a 3 and out for Oklahoma State. And then you have to punt again after another 3 and out, and you're like, okay, this is kind of showing some odd similarities to last week where the offense kind of stalled out a little bit after, Will Howard comes in and he plays great on his first 4 or 5 drives of the game against TCU, and then things kind of stall out as he gets hurt. Jake Rubley comes in, what have you. But that didn't happen because then K-State routed off 3 more touchdowns, as you indicated a little bit earlier, and Oklahoma State continued to have these short drives. And then then K-State gets the big touchdown by Deuce that goes for, 62 yards or whatever it was. And then they get the Phillip Brooks 31-yard touchdown reception. They get the 41-yard Kid Warner touchdown reception on the screen. It's just like, holy cow. Like, they were just relentless at times yesterday offensively when they needed to be. And not that they got conservative on those 2 drives where they went 3 and out. I just don't think they executed as well on those couple of drives where they did at other points in the game. Well,
I would just say the word for yesterday was energy. Everything about the game had energy, whether it was the players who, like, even when they got up big, they just kept going and going because I think they were out to prove a point. Like, they were obviously frustrated about last week and they wanted to make sure they played a full 4 quarters. Again, that's a very cliche thing to say in sports, but it's one of those deals that when you play a complete performance, like, there's a reason why we have stereotypes and cliches in the world. It's because most of the time they do actually end up being accurate. And in sports, if you play a perfect game and you're at the highest level, like, all those things are true. K-State played a full 4 quarters yesterday. They had a great home environment. All this stuff was perfect for them in that game. So they deserve a ton of credit for it. And while we were talking about the defense, I don't know, did you see the video of Gunnar Gundy in the game yesterday of his hand shaking?
No.
Okay, I got to pull this up for you. And for anybody that is looking or listening to this, you can't see what's going on. Just go to Twitter. I retweeted it at one point. Derek Duke was the first person that I saw that posted it. This is Gunnar Gundy in the game. Look at his hand shaking, waiting to take a snap. It's a young kid, big environment, but man, that's not the composure that you want to see out of the coach's kid. So that's pretty crazy. And somebody points out, Oh, even better. This is David Dossett, a current K-State recruit, class of 2024 receiver. He responded to the tweet and said he looked at Felix. So I would assume that's probably true. Like if you're a quarterback and you see Felix Anudike Uzama right there, you're probably a little bit on edge about what's going to happen. So everybody was awesome yesterday, and we do 3 positives, 3 negatives afterwards, and I would love to not be like you were, where you're like there were none.
I thought that was pretty creative. People seem to like that.
I couldn't find anything to harp on except for the fact that the penalties were a problem again. Although I went a different route, I wasn't going to blame K-State for the penalties. Although the coach going into a ref, like, come on, we got to clean that up over there. The officiating crew was terrible yesterday, and K-State won 48-0. Like Felix Anudike held the lot probably. Echo Boydo was great in coverage, yet somehow he ends up with a pass interference call when I think there probably could have been a couple of OPIs in the game. They were just in the spots and just some of the weird randomness. Like I'm on record, Scott Campbell, I think, is the worst ref in the Big 12. And that was something else yesterday, and it didn't really matter. So it makes it all the more fun to kind of laugh at and everything. But just one thing to note. Thinking about some of the other things from yesterday's game, Deuce Vaughn was great. He runs the ball well. And everything else went so well in the game for K-State that Chris Klieman had to mention in the press conference as he's walking out, like, oh, hey, Deuce Vaughn, nobody asked about him today. He's still pretty good. Like, that tells you where everything was at yesterday, that nobody cared about Deuce Vaughn's performance because he was spectacular with running the football. But that catch he made, like, it was a great throw by Will Howard. It was probably Howard's best throw of the day. But that was a heck of a catch by Deuce Vaughn. And if you watch it in slow motion, how it works out too, like he just continues to prove that he's incredible.
Yeah, I thought the way Deuce played was awesome. And I think in the game preview, I kind of signaled him out as having to be a really big key for the offense if they were going to be able to win the game. And obviously I didn't predict a 48-0 win. In fact, I predicted an Oklahoma State victory, like you pointed out earlier. But for Deuce to carry it 22 times for 158 yards, has a rushing touchdown now in back-to-back weeks. He was able to get multiple scores for the first time, I think, since the Mizzou game, which is kind of an important thing to point out too. And I think it maybe is the first time that he's had back-to-back weeks with a score since the South Dakota and the Mizzou week. So the first 2 weeks of the season. And I feel like him getting into the end zone is something that K-State needed because there's been times this year where he struggled to find the end zone. So for him to get into the end zone a couple different times on Saturday against Oklahoma State was, in my opinion, really key. And while he wasn't super important in the passing game, he only has 4 receptions for 18 yards. I did think he was really effective, as like a check down option. I think early in the game, Will Howard found him on the first drive for a check down, and then he found him again for another check down. And those are kind of just plays I thought that were important for Kansas State to hit on because it was an 11-yard gain, and that was a 5-yard gain on those check down passes. And to have that safety net, Will Howard even said after the game that, that's really, really nice to have because if your main receivers, your first target, your second target aren't getting open, and they were much of yesterday when you look at what Malik Knowles and Cade Warner were able to do in the receiving game, it just gives a quarterback another guy to just check it down to, and they feel confident that they're going to be able to get 2-3 yards on those kind of plays because Deuce is either going to be open ahead of the chains or he's going to be open and make someone miss and gain a few more yards after that. And I thought Deuce was important in the passing game without maybe putting up the most prolific numbers yesterday.
Yeah, everybody hit, and in another group that deserves a big shout out because I've been critical of them at times this year. The offensive line was phenomenal yesterday. They've been great at blocking for the run most of the season. It can be easy to do at times when Martinez and Vaughn are your 2 key runners, but that was fantastic work by them because it didn't feel like there were too many times that Will Howard was under pressure. And when he was, they were able to hold up in the right spots to where he could move the pocket a little bit or roll out and free himself up and still keep a play alive. So the offensive line deserves a ton of credit for how they played yesterday. I pulled it up to look. Yesterday, no surprise, was the best grade that the offensive line has received from Pro Football Focus for a game this season, which also not shocking. It's the best grade overall K-State had as a team this season, right up there with the South Dakota and Texas Tech games. But they played phenomenal football yesterday, and there's really not a ton more to say other than, I guess, hitting on some of the injury stuff that we now know. They lost Bo Palmer during the week. That was something that I had heard. Chris Kleiman is kind of strange how he handled it yesterday. Like it seemed very serious, and just kind of like a freak thing that happened. So that was one of the reasons why Jake Clifton saw so much time yesterday. And I thought Clifton handled it pretty well, especially for his Kleiman laid out, moving to a different position than what he's kind of accustomed to. So pretty impressive day for him there. Daniel Green, I don't know what the chances of him playing in the Texas game are at this point in time. That's probably something where we'll get a better update on Tuesday. But they tried as hard as they could there. And then Adrian Martinez, I think everybody's tune started to kind of shift before the game when you see him out there and you go, oh, okay, I think he might give this a go today. But then Chris Kleiman tells us 25 minutes before the game, they had a conversation, him, Colin Klein, and Martinez. And the conversation was essentially that Martinez didn't feel like he was going to be able to be at 100%, and was comfortable with letting Will Howard go out there. And I think that takes that's an impressive move by a guy like Adrian Martinez, who, number one, we know how much he wants to be on the field and how much he can battle through. But for him to be able to, in a season where he's got everything to prove, he finally feels like, he's got a team that's helping support him, to be able to take the foot off the gas and make a move that's, maybe in the best interest of the team. That's really impressive by him. And then Will Howard to stay ready, and he's looked great the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, I thought that just everything clicked. And I don't want to I feel like we should probably talk about the quarterback situation because it has kind of popped up here a little bit. Mason, is there going to be a quarterback controversy? I don't think there's going to be, from the standpoint that Kansas State still wants to be able to redshirt Will Howard. And I feel like this season gives you all the more reason to want to be able to redshirt
him.
Yeah,
and that's a great point, because I initially when I saw it last night, I was thinking, but that's a good thing to keep in people's minds, is that if Adrian is back to 100% health, they will want him back out on the field. One, because they feel like he deserves the chance, obviously. Like, he wasn't playing bad to lose a job, and they can still win games with him out there. And it's only been, 6 quarters of Will Howard, basically. And yeah, this right now, what we've seen the last 2 games, it changes the quarterback conversation for the next couple of years in a giant way. And Will Howard looks like a dude that you want to make sure has as much time as he can to play at K-State right now. So if you can redshirt him still this year, that would be a gift. Now, before I give it back to you, I will say this. Like, if something were to go haywire in the latter part of the year, I have no doubt that K-State would burn the red shirt of Will Howard, and he would be all for it. If it, say they are playing for a Big 12 championship or something, and Will Howard needs to be out there, like, I have no doubt that would be a move that they make, and they would all be at peace with that.
Correct. And I will say, he was asked last night after the game about the possibility of redshirting still, and if that's something still on the table. And I doubt that he had those conversations with Coach Kleiman or Colin Klein directly after the game, or even during the week.
They should have done it on the field after the game when he's on the shoulders of his teammates. Like, hey, coach, you going to redshirt me still?
Anyway, Will answered by saying, and this is a quote, "I'm all for the team. Whatever happens, happens. I don't know what the deal is with Adrian, what's going on, so we'll take it one day at a time." So I do think what you kind of said there is pretty spot on with the idea that they'll play him and they'll burn the red shirt if they have to. But at the same time, in an ideal world, I think they would like to not have to burn the red shirt. And I will also say, talking about the future of the quarterback position, and not to look ahead to 2023, because obviously what Kansas State is experiencing right now in 2022 is pretty special, with an opportunity to play for a Big 12 title game as they sit in sole possession of second place here, and we actually had this conversation as we were driving back from Big 12 basketball media days last week, was what's the future of that quarterback position look like? Because it's probably fair to expect someone to transfer out at some point this offseason, just with the way the world works today. But we didn't know if they were potentially going to go and explore the idea of getting a transfer quarterback for 2023. Or we didn't know if, Will Howard or Jake Rilby would compete with potentially Avery Johnson, or, those are all things that were on the table, I think, a week ago. And I still think you probably hold some sort of competition, because competition is what breeds excellence and what breeds players deserving to get on the field. But I think you feel really confident about Will Howard potentially being your starting quarterback heading into 2023 based on what you've seen in his 2 games of 2022. And that takes a lot of burden off of you in the offseason. And I think it also, I know fans really love the idea of Avery Johnson, right? They should. He's incredibly talented. He's a 4-star recruit. He's from the state of Kansas. Like, he's the
Kids are
golden
already
boy.
dressing up for him on Halloween. Like, come
Yeah,
on.
he's a golden boy, right? Like, those are all incredible things. But at the same time, if you don't have to put him out on the field right away, that's a really good thing. If you don't have to, if you're able to redshirt him as a true freshman, that's an awesome thing because it allows him to be at K-State for one more season. In the big picture, it allows him to potentially just set himself up for a longer, more fruitful Kansas State career. And I know this isn't a direct comparison at all, but look at kind of what the plan seems to be from an outside perspective at Texas. Because the plan, at least from an outside perspective, and I don't have anyone telling me this, is that Quinn Ewers is going to continue to start the rest of the season, obviously. They're probably going to start him next season. And then I think in an ideal world, they hope that Quinn's either going off to the NFL in the conclusion of the 2023 season, or he's back for the 2024 season. He's one of the best quarterbacks in college football returning. And then you gradually go into Arch Manning at some point. I think that's the ideal world for Texas is Quinn's your starter in 2023, goes off to the NFL after that season. Arch Manning gets a redshirt year in 2023, is your starting quarterback in 2024. And I don't know if that's exactly how it's going to work for Will Howard in Kansas State and Avery Johnson, but I think there's a potential that in an ideal world, Will Howard is your starting quarterback for 2023. Avery's able to redshirt. Will Howard is potentially your starting quarterback in 2024 as a redshirt sophomore. Then Avery Johnson is potentially in that rotation, or he's starting come 2025.
Yeah, I think that there's a way to play this and see how it all goes out. But yeah, right now there's no reason to bail on the Will Howard thing, which is, it sounds crazy to say based off where everything was. And I want to go back to this for a second because I was criticized for this when we first took over on September 1st. One of the first stories that we had on there, I had a list, and it was the 5 Wildcats with the most approved in 2022. Do you happen to remember any of the guys that were on there? It's okay if you tell me that you didn't read it or you didn't care, because
yeah, I do. I remember some of them. Adrian Martinez was on it.
yes,
I want to say Malik Knowles was on it.
I believe that he probably was. All right, I'm going to pull it up right here, and we'll go through it. Number 1 was Adrian Martinez.
Okay, so I nailed that one. Was Malik Knowles on it?
Malik Knowles was number 2.
Okay, so I'm doing really good right now.
Yep.
I don't think Felix was on it. Was
He
Khalid Duke? Was
Felix and
on it?
Khalid Duke were both on it.
Were they 3
Felix
and 4?
was number 3. Khalid Duke was number 4. And for Felix, it wasn't really his fault. Like, I will say that. It's more so the fact that there have been times where it has felt like in past years, K-State has had a defensive end and he's going up, climbing the ladder, should be doing this, should be doing that. And then it feels like it falls flat. So whether that was Reggie Walker a few years ago, Wyatt Hubert kind of had a disappointing 2020. There was part of that. And also, like, I laid it out in here. Felix had 11 sacks last season, but 9 of his 11 sacks came in 4 games against Southern Illinois, Texas Tech, TCU, and Kansas, the 4 worst teams they played last year. So, and he's certainly done that. He's got 7.5 sacks this season now. He looks even better, and he's doing it while he's hurt. Like, Felix is, I check all the boxes on those. And yesterday, Malik Knowles and Phillip Brooks and Cade Warner, they were all phenomenal yesterday. Like, they made plays, and if that's the wide receiver core moving forward, like, there are still some limitations and there are still some things that they need to do better. But my word, like, they are in a really good spot. Number 5 on the list, though, was Mr. Will Howard. And people were like, how can you say Will Howard? He's the backup quarterback. Because, as I laid out in here, the last 2 seasons, the plan was not for Will Howard to play a single snap because Skylar Thompson was here. And what happened? He got hurt. He had to play. This year, what happens? The starting quarterback gets hurt, has to play, and Will Howard has come in and I think proven himself in some way. So just want to throw that out there. I'm not trying to, clap back too hard at people, but just wanted to, get one over and make sure everybody realized that sometimes I do know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do remember you listening to Will Howard on there, and I remember thinking, oh, that's kind of interesting, and I kind of In today's world, though, it does make sense because you can prove things off the field and out of the view of media or fans. And clearly, Will Howard has proven in practice that he's the undisputed number 2 quarterback. And he's proven now on the field in his 2 games that he's played that, hey, this kid might be pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So he's proven a lot. And I agree with you.
Here's what I said. It isn't the most exciting of guys with something to prove, but Will Howard is entering his 3rd season at K-State and is yet to breed a ton of confidence in Manhattan. Despite being locked in as QB2 in all 3 seasons, he has been thrown into action for extended periods in each of his first 2 seasons. He very easily could see time again this year if Adrian Martinez goes down or against low-grade opponents. Any way possible, though, Howard needs good buzz heading into the offseason if he wants to compete for the 2023 starting quarterback job. So it's very similar to what we were talking about in the middle of the season. Like, we had not seen Will Howard, and based off the track record and how everything else was going, like, you thought, might he be the odd man out? But now he's proven himself the last 2 weeks. Before we move on to some other stuff, we're also going to get into real quick the Big 12's new TV deal that they finalized today, according to the Sports Business Journal. Next week against Texas, who starts at quarterback for K-State? Obviously, we don't know anything about the status. You would think another week goes by. Maybe Adrian Martinez is healthy enough to go, but Will Howard's only played in 2 games. Do you toss Will Howard out there and try to ride the momentum one last time and then say, okay, we're going to save that 4th game if we can for a later point?
I think if Adrian Martinez is healthy and good enough to go, Adrian's going to be the starting quarterback.
Is that what you would do, though? Putting you on the spot.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. All right. Just making sure.
It is because I think that some of Will Howard's quality play over the last 2 weeks should be credited to the way the wide receivers have played. And I think that, talk about a more statement than that. I think if the receivers are able to play in a similar fashion as they've played the last couple of weeks for Will Howard, that I think Adrian Martinez could have a pretty quality game at quarterback as well.
I would agree with that.
But at the same time, if Adrian is healthy and you put him out there and Adrian struggles in the passing game or he's not running the ball very effectively, maybe my leash is kind of short.
Yeah, I think that you have that luxury now to where if Adrian Martinez he gets out there, something happens, like, you're not worried about throwing Will Howard out there now. If Adrian's 100% and he's ready to go, you let him go. It's still his team. It's still his job. But you now have options if you're K-State. And that's at least always good to have options. And we'll see where it goes. And honestly, like, it's not a bad problem to have if you're K-State in this situation where going into the year, most people have been like, no, it's not an option between should Will Howard be out there or should he not be. But now it is. So that's good news. Another thing on the Adrian Martinez topic, and I don't know, I don't think that they've announced quite yet who the TV squads will be next week. K-State and Texas will kick off at 6:00. The game is scheduled for FS1 as of now, but that is supposed to be Game 7 of the World Series that night. If Game 7 of the World Series does not happen, I do believe that they will play that game on Fox. So that's just something to consider as well. But one of the guys that might call the game is Tim Brando, who called the game against TCU.
Here comes Mason getting on its soapbox.
Well, I'm trying to. I've got a microphone in front of me. I'm trying to be a voice for K-State folks right now. Yes, Tim Brando, the guy that was horrific in the Texas Tech game last year, got a lot of names, pronounced incorrectly. His broadcast partner, Spencer Tillman, asked if left guard Cooper Beebe was in on defense, making tackles against Texas Tech, all that weird jazz. And then had some things go on during the TCU game and everything. Here's a tweet that took place last night. This first one is from Bruce Feldman of The Athletic and Fox. Said the Big 12 is wild. This year, it's the most unpredictable conference I can ever recall in college football. Not shocked that K-State beat Okie State, but hammering Oklahoma State 48-0 without their starting quarterback. Impressive stuff from Chris Kleiman's squad. Tim Brando, unprovoked, decides that he needs to be a part of this conversation and dives in and says, I'm guessing their starting quarterback now is Will Howard. Martinez may well have been Wally pipped. Truth is, that young man pulled himself out of last week's game. another story for another day. And if we're fortunate enough to have them again, I can't wait to talk to Coach Cly about it.
I love your reading voice, by the way.
That's how it reads.
Like if you were to read to a class of first graders, you'd be entertaining to listen to.
Well, my mom's a teacher, so I probably pick up some of that from her. And
it's an impressive reading voice.
Just so that in itself, like, is ridiculous. Like, first off, I'm not of the belief that you say that about somebody because, one, like, how does Tim Brando, would he actually know that? And that doesn't seem to be the case at all for a guy like Adrian Martinez, that he would go and be like, hey, I want out of the game or something, like, you got to take me out. I think
he could have.
He could have.
I mean, think about what we were told yesterday before the game, from the standpoint that Coach Kleiman said after the game that he, Colin Klein, Will Howard, and Adrian Martinez had a conversation, the four of them, and Adrian Martinez was honest enough to say, I don't have 100% full confidence in my left knee to play this game and help our team win. First of all, that takes a lot of character to say that.
Oh, I thought you were gonna use the term that seems to run rampant inside the K-State locker room now, and that's nuts.
No, I was going to say that takes a lot of character to say that, but it does. No, I'm not going to. I could. It takes a lot of character to say that. And I respect Adrian Martinez for having the character to stand up and say that, because we know Adrian Martinez is tough. The kid played with a broken jaw last year at Nebraska. And stay tuned for the end of the show. We're going to tie that broken jaw thing back in at the end of the show. But to do that is impressive, but I don't think Adrian Martinez is pulling himself voluntarily from a football game if he's not feeling like he can play or help the team. Like, he's not going to take himself out if he feels good enough to play.
That's the point of it. Like, the phrasing of it, like, maybe that is the case. And so maybe you say something along the lines of like, hey, he decided, like, he wasn't 100% and he took himself out. The way that Tim Brando phrases that, it's like you're throwing a dude under the bus. And like, in sports, and specifically football,
specifically like, college sports too.
you don't like, if you don't know, you don't insinuate or basically say that somebody is like soft or whatever the connotation that would go to like Adrian Martinez asking out of a game would be. And also, like, it's just not in his character. So it would, and again, I don't think Tim Brando actually knows. I think he's just throwing crap at the wall and hoping it sticks. But ultimately, I think that this is one of those deals where, like, if Adrian Martinez did have that conversation, it's, hey, the knee's not going too well for me right now. I'm not going to be able to move and do some of the things. Like, Will might give us the best opportunity right here, and I'm okay if that's the decision we make. Like, that seems to be more reasonable than going in and just like being like I don't think Adrian Martinez is the cowardly lion. Like, I don't think that he's scared of anything that comes at him, because guess what? He just saw he had a crap offensive line in front of him at Nebraska last season, and for all the time he was there, and he had awful Nebraska fans coming at him and calling him names and saying he was the problem, and all this crap he had to deal with in Lincoln. I'm not concerned about it at all. So interesting. Well, Tim Brando was not done last night. This man loves to go on Twitter and search for his own name or anything that involves him. He starts replying to tweets of K-State fans. So shout out to Blake Morris for quote tweeting it and says, I hope Kleiman refuses to talk to him. He later got blocked. But Tim Brando responds with, really? Pretty sure you're overthinking this.
Not to interrupt. If you block on Twitter, you're an idiot.
Gosh.
Because you can just mute.
Yeah.
And no one knows.
Yeah.
Because if you block someone, you're just asking for them to respond again, because they're going to screenshot that you blocked them. They're still going to tag you and everything else. Just mute people.
And he says, really? Pretty sure you're overthinking this just a little. We respect one another greatly. Your message board cesspool means zero to him. It means zero to me. Put it in your peace pipe pards and smoke on it. Great. And so then Blake responds and said, really, we listened to you speculate on a player's health all last week and are watching you do the same thing tonight. If a teammate thinks the guy next to him will give the team a better chance to win, that should be celebrated. Enjoy your game prep. Oh, which also, credit to Blake, he ends that on hey, here's my point. Like, I'm not like going to try and come at you too hard here. Have a great night. And then Timmy B responds, give it a break. We played the hand we were dealt. We were left to wonder because your coach didn't feel it was in his best interest to be transparent with us. No biggie. We've moved on. However, if you don't think I'll question him on it next time, you're sadly mistaken. Thanks.
I mean,
What
this
a
guy's
guy.
just, I just don't like people on Twitter who feel the need to insert themselves into everything and share their opinion on everything. And I understand it's a platform that's essentially designed to do that. And clearly Mason just found a really good one.
We
Where he
got
finds my
another good
opinion
one
really
here. Oh,
stupid as he
man.
busts out in laughter again. And I interjected myself last night into something on Twitter, the Michigan Michigan fight.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into that on here, but it's just like, just shut up. Like, stay in your own lane.
Right.
Not to quote LeVar Ball, stay in your own lane.
Here we go. Another more dramatic reading of Tim Brando's tweets last night. This is from Bill's Towel in response to Brando. If I were Coach Kleiman, I wouldn't give you a second of my time. You're a waste of time and airtime. And Bill's Towel is an allusion to something. I'll have to explain it to you later in another part of K-State lore. Brando, and this is always when you know, like, you're backed against the wall when this is the card you have to pull out. I have 50 years of service that says otherwise. Keep on hating, kid. Love it. Also, Tim, you can tell he tweets like with a ton of emotion because there are some misspellings, and also this has a random at sign on it. So it says, keep on hating, kid.
Nice.
Let's see. Let's see if there are any other good ones here. I don't think so. I think that's kind of it, but there you go. It's a great time for all involved and everything that went on. So good stuff. Great stuff. Shout out to Timmy B and everything that went on with that. And we'll see what the broadcast crew ends up looking like. Yeah, K-State would be blessed if they could get Jason Benetti and Brock Hewitt again, because I think that is a fantastic duo. Some people may disagree, but I think that they are very, very good at what they do. I just don't like Benetti when he's calling White Sox games and he acts like the White Sox can do no wrong. And blah.
Jason Benetti's awesome on White
I know.
Sox.
I love Benetti, but come on, the dude just like
Jason Benetti's great on the White Sox.
It's like games. Nobody can like disrespect the White Sox or do some of these things. And then the second the White Sox are like running around with their chains and flipping people off when they're 10 games below 500 with old ass Tony La Russa crapping the bed in the dugout, he's like, oh, the White Sox, they're great. Like,
Mason, do you have a favorite you can put it on the board call from Hawk? Against your Royals?
Probably not. I know that I've watched enough Hawk Harrelson with a lot of his stuff. I like the one where Mark Burley gets called for a balk, and he goes off on Joe West, and then he's got the one he's like, "You gotta be bleeping me." So that's all good stuff there.
I'm not a White Sox fan. My dad grew up a White Sox fan. He still kind of roots for the Sox, but I kind of have a soft spot for Hawk because I never had to listen to him on an overly consistent basis. I think he's hilarious.
I do like listening to Hawk Harrelson for the shock factor. Okay, we'll move into some other stuff real quick. This is going to be long. I'm sorry, folks. Here are my tweets involving Will Howard from the past 2 years, just in the name of transparency. This is from November 1st, 2020. Watching his idol tonight, I now see why Will Howard struggled a little yesterday. It's okay. Still time to go watch Dak film. So the Cowboys and Eagles must have been playing that night. Would Wentz have been with he would have been with the Eagles then, and he must have sucked. So that's good. November 7th, 2020. Does Will Howard go for his third fumble in 3 possessions? I think that might have been the Oklahoma State game in 2020. Then the very next day, November 8th, CeeDee Lamb fumbling at Will Howard style. That's great. A week later, Adnan Virk tweets, Carson Wentz is the only player with a giveaway in every NFL game this season. And then I said, Will Howard took a page out of Wentz's book last weekend. Let's see. September 11th, 2021, Will Howard, turnover. Let's see. Going down the list now. That's somebody replying. Oh, here we go. This is a positive tweet. September 18th. H-bomb. Will Howard, 68 yards to Daniel Amaterbebe on the second play of the game. Touchdown Cats. So there you go. Looking through this, Will Howard had his Daniel Jones game. Didn't turn the ball over and made some solid plays as well. So as you can tell, I'm not a Daniel Jones guy. Not a big believer in him. So
He's playing well this year.
So I had that going. April 12th, 2022. This is a positive one. Will Howard posts a link to his website. So if you want any Will Howard merch, and all I did was the Spider-Man gif of them pointing at each other. And I said Tiger Woods and Will Howard because Will Howard's logo looks very, very similar to that of Tiger Woods' logo. And then everything else is positive. The problem that I need right now is I've searched for Will Howard in my tweets. I now need to go search Will Wentz because I think I've called Will Howard Carson Wentz a handful of times. And to Will Howard, I am sorry for that. But I was, dealing with the cards that I was dealt. Yeah, here you go. November 28th, 2020. This would have been the Texas game. I don't know. That probably would have been Texas. I said Will Wentz strikes again. So that's not great. But I'm sorry to Will Howard. All those tweets came when I was a sports talk radio host. I had to say inflammatory things to get the people riled up. And it didn't look great. But also, we now know sometimes people get put in unfortunate situations and bad things happen to them. So I want to be forgiven for those. And I think that Will Howard has turned his career around at K-State, and it's a great thing for the Wildcats. So just putting myself out there. Other people I know have those comments and remarks, but I'm the brave soul that will go through and own up to my past language towards Will Howard.
I appreciate that. I also really appreciated people on the message boards yesterday going through and finding all the old Will Howard takes. I thought that was so funny.
It's easy to do, too, because there are a ton of them.
It was like old takes exposed occurring on the email online message boards. I thought it was really, really funny.
Yeah, it's that's tough stuff there. A couple of other things to note. The Big 12, this was from the Sports Business Journal this morning. The Big 12, this is their headline. The Big 12 scores big win by renewing media rights deal with ESPN and Fox. The Big 12 has stabilized its future by coming to terms with ESPN and Fox on a 6-year media rights agreement with a total of $2.28 billion, an annual average of $380 million for the league. If you break that down and divide that by 12, which ends up being the amount of league members that will be in the Big 12 at that time, that comes close to $32 million a year. Some of the notes that come with this, first off, credit to Brett Yormark for getting this done. They wanted to do a shorter deal because now what this guarantees is you have stability in the near future, but also the Big 12, their next TV rights agreement will come up for discussion prior to the next wave of SEC and ACC discussions. So they're getting in front of some of the other leagues that are going to have discussions again in the future, which, at that point, who knows how sports looks or college football, basketball, whatever. But K-State's going to have, or the Big 12 is going to have an opportunity to help out schools like K-State and Oklahoma State moving forward. Some of the other notes in this thing, there are going to be basketball games on Fox now. Not a ton of them, but there are going to be basketball games on Fox and FS1, which is a significant deal. And then also, if you look around at some of this, ESPN gets the top 4 football picks each season, 6 of the top 8 picks, 8 of the top 12, and 12 of the top 20 picks. As part of the deal, ESPN also gets the rights to the Big 12 football championship and the basketball tournament championship game. The Big 12's parity helped convince Fox, whose package includes 26 football games per season that will run on Fox Broadcast Network and FS1 to the deal. So there you have it. That's those are just some of the general notes on it. The other thing that I'll make note of with that money I mentioned earlier, roughly $32 million, close to that per year, and what you would assume a payout would be to each school in the league, that puts them ahead of what the ACC currently is at, and that's only about $2.5–3 million off of what the Pac-12 brought in for each school last year. And those numbers obviously include USC and UCLA, and there's no way that the Pac-12 is getting anything like that now that USC and UCLA are leaving. And so I think this is a significant deal. It's not game-changing because obviously the Big Ten and SEC are shoulders above everybody else right now. But if there are going to be any leagues that want to try and rise up and have a shot when they go up against those, or, if you're not going to be one of the top 2, you might as well be third. And the Big 12 has positioned themselves, I think, in a really good spot to be number 3 right now. And also in the last 2 years of uncertainty in college sports, for them to get some stability and to put themselves in a position where you kind of have something to build off of, no matter how you want to handle something. I think that's a really significant thing for the Big 12. So credit to Brett Yormark. Like 2 months in on the job, 3 months in on the job, getting a TV deal done for the Big 12 ahead of schedule.
Yeah, I don't want to get too into the weeds on this because I'm obviously not the most knowledgeable on it at this point yet, just because it broke this morning. And I have had other more important things to worry about and learn about than the Big 12's TV contract standings in my
Like Will Howard.
2 months on the K-State beat. But I will say this, and I said this to you before we started recording. I think positioning yourself to be equal or maybe slightly better than what we already consider the other Power 5 conferences that aren't going to be the Big 10 and the SEC, because clearly those are kind of moving into a category of their own, in my opinion. I think most people's opinion, they're kind of sliding into their own kind of area, is that we now today in college football kind of view things as, really like 3 groups, where we've got group of 5, Power 5, but then we also have the FCS. I think we can kind of understand that things maybe are going to transition a little bit in this idea of you're going to have 2 super conferences of the Big 10 and the SEC, and then you're going to have 3 conferences of the Big 12, the Pac-12, and the ACC, who are all going to have like higher status and viewed as more competitive, better leagues than that of the MAC, the Sun Belt, the Mountain West, etc., because the status that those leagues hold and the revenue that those leagues do bring in, even though it's not very comparable to what the 2 super conferences, the Big 10 and the SEC, would bring in, it's still going to be better than, like I said, the Sun Belt, the Mountain West, the MAC, all those other leagues. So I think the Big 12 is positioning themselves to be in a solid spot. And I do think that we could be getting to a point where I think conference realignment is going to slow down until what I personally think is the ACC's contract is able to get broken. Either someone's going to figure out how it gets broken, or we get to like 2033 or whatever, and then those ACC brands that are large and valuable, the Clemson, the North Carolina, potentially like a Virginia or a Miami, Florida State, then try and get out of it and see what their value is of potentially joining the Big 10 or the SEC. And I think Notre Dame obviously continues to hold a lot of power in this kind of landscape as well, because if the Irish eventually decide to join the Big 10 or are brought into the Big 10 with some other school from the Pac-12 at some point, then maybe another round of this stuff sparks again. So we'll see where this all goes. But I think, long story short, I think the Big 12 signing this extension with ESPN and Fox puts them in a good position to at least be competitive with the Pac-12. I think the Pac-12, for whatever reason, George Kliavkoff seems to be really, really confident in the type of contract that they're going to be able to land. I think a lot of the stuff he says publicly is maybe
wrong, false.
Yeah, I'm not going to go that far, but I just question it. Like some of the stuff he says, I'm like, I don't know how that can be true, or like some of the things he does publicly, in my opinion, come off as being desperate. And
they do.
The best example of that, in my opinion, is him saying things about UCLA leaving the Pac-12 and how they're actually going to lose money by going to the Big 10, when in reality, like their media rights distribution is going to be essentially like double what they're getting in the Pac-12. But with all their travel money that they're going to be spending and hotel money that they're going to be spending, that they're actually going to be losing money. Like,
you think the people that made that decision to leave, they like looked at it and like, well, we go to the Big 10, we get this status raise, but we're going to lose a ton of money, but we should still do this. Like that's not how this worked.
I just think he speaks out of both sides of his mouth.
He does.
Because, he says those things publicly about UCLA going to the Big 10 and how it's actually bad for UCLA, but then he goes to UC Board of Regents and it's essentially, in my opinion, like begging them to find a way to keep them in the Pac-12. It's like, come on, man.
Yeah, I just think that it's kind of one of those deals where, one, I will acknowledge this. He put himself, he was put in a bad situation. Like the Pac-12 has been poorly managed for a while. They're in a bad spot, and all this stuff that's going on like that, I get it. And now he's having to try and climb out of what we now know is seemingly a gigantic hole. And it doesn't get any easier to dig out of the hole when it like continues to fall out from under you when UCLA and USC decide that they're going to bail for the Big Ten. So that is something to know. Real quick, a little bit more of something to supplement this. This is from Dennis Dodd. CBS Sports confirmed the Big 12 signing their new 6-year media rights deal with ESPN and Fox. But the note on this is, with college football playoff expansion, the annual total could surpass $50 million annually per school. Another thing to note is that this would the pay would elevate if the Big 12 is to add new members. Like, that should be assumed by most people, but just to throw that out there. So if they do add, say, 4 Pac-12 schools or something at some point in the future, there would be more money that comes into this deal. And so everybody's happy. And that's where you evaluate, does it make more sense to expand and add more schools, which it very well may, especially if, like, you just eliminate an opponent in the Pac-12. Because, I mean, I know you don't want to get too far into this, but real quick, like, gut feeling, does the Pac-12 exist in 15 years?
My answer to that depends on what the Big Ten does.
Okay.
Because I don't think, personally, I don't see them leaving for the Big 12, because I don't think the difference is that large or noticeable in terms of what their media rights distributions are going to be. And with the way that the college football playoff is being set up now with the 12-team playoff, and you get an automatic qualifier from each of the leagues, I don't think that it's advantageous for them to leave the Pac-12 and go to the Big 12 for diminishing returns potentially on the financial side of things, and potentially more competition on getting into the college football playoff. But if Oregon and Washington were to get an invitation to the Big Ten at some point, or the Big Ten is able to land Notre Dame on the contingency that Stanford comes with them.
I was about to credit you for not bringing up Stanford, but then you brought up Stanford. Like,
I don't
get the appeal of Stanford. Like, I get it. Like, they're supposed to be smart, but, like, that doesn't do crap for you in sports, and they don't have anybody that shows up. David Shaw is more like David Fraud. Like, he can't win games out there now. I think I don't get the Stanford love.
If you're talking brand value, no, Stanford definitely doesn't bring the type of cachet that UCLA, USC would, or certainly Notre Dame as well. But if you're able to get Notre Dame, you do it if it means you have to get Stanford too. And also, let's realize too that the people that are actually making the decisions on this aren't the athletic directors. It's the chancellors and presidents of the universities. And they care about aligning themselves with other smart people and other smart institutions like Stanford. And I can promise you that people at Northwestern, people at Michigan, people at, the University of Illinois, the people at Indiana, those schools that are viewed as being incredible academic institutions in the Big Ten would like to align themselves with Stanford and Notre Dame.
Well, whatever, a bunch of nerds at Stanford that can't win football games or draw a big crowd. Good luck making money with them, but hey, that's how it goes. Couple of things real quick to note. Big 12 yesterday. Shout out to the league for coming through for Mason Voth and his financial benefits yesterday. The Big 12 parlay came through for me. With one element from each of the 4 games yesterday. TCU and West Virginia, the over hit. TCU also covered on a 4th down shot to the end zone that TCU absolutely did not need to take, but they did it and they scored. So I applaud Sonny Dykes for doing that. And then Oklahoma, the most predictable -1.5 of all time. Like, that was pretty easy to surmise that they were going to be able to get that job done. And they did against Iowa State. I love the fake field goal to the kicker. That was beautiful. Watching Matt Campbell run around and freak out afterwards was perfect. The Wildcats, they covered the -1.5 just barely, so that was good. And then Baylor and Texas Tech. I had the over in that game. I had it at 60.5. It was not pretty when I left Manhattan. It did not look like it was going to be a game that hit the over for me. And then Baylor scores 21 points in the 4th quarter to blow out Texas Tech. And that was a good payday. It was also good for you and me in the standings for our EMA online picks, because I went 3-1 yesterday. The only one I got wrong was Texas Tech. We all three had Texas Tech, you, me, and Gabe. But I had TCU, OU, and K-State. You had TCU and OU, so you go 2-2. Tough day for Gabe. He tried hard with the West Virginia one to sneak that in there. It didn't work out. Sonny Dykes, I think, knew that, and he goes 1-3. So the official standings heading into Week 10, I'm 32-17-2, and I've got
That's
a three-game.
really good.
It's okay. I've got a 3-game lead over Gabe, who's 29-20-2. And then you are there at 27-22-2, but you closed the gap yesterday on Gabe. So next week we get back into the full swing of things where there will be 5 Big 12 games that get played. So it's an extra game than what we've had over like the last 3 or 4 weeks. So that'll be significant. We get Oklahoma State at KU, Texas at K-State, Texas Tech at TCU, Baylor at Oklahoma, and West Virginia at Iowa State. We'll talk about those later in the week. But do you have any quick thoughts on the other games that took place in the Big 12 yesterday? Because I feel like for the most part, they were all fairly predictable. West Virginia has proven they're going to be much more competitive at home than they are on the road, but they probably don't have the horses to get it done when you're playing a team that's at a high level like TCU was. My takeaway on Oklahoma, they still have some issues to figure out, but like they had enough power and talent to overtake Iowa State, who offensively is still atrocious. They didn't score a touchdown, I think, until the fourth quarter. It was ugly the entire game. They ended up losing. And then I was shocked by what happened in Lubbock. Like,
yeah, that's where I was going to go. I was going to say, don't sleep on Baylor.
yeah.
I feel like a lot of people were kind of looking at Baylor a couple of weeks ago and was kind of thinking, okay, this team's not really a contender for the Big 12 title. Guys, they're 5-3. They're 3-2 in the league right now. They're tied with Oklahoma State and Texas at 3-2 in third place. They obviously have that loss to Oklahoma State, so Oklahoma State has a tiebreaker on them, but I don't think Baylor and Texas have played yet this season. Obviously, K-State still has to play both Baylor and Texas. Those are their next 2 games. And those are tough. Those are really tough. They're going to have to go to Waco in 2 weeks, and obviously Texas coming in to Manhattan next week is tough.
Here's this. Baylor's finishing stretch this year at Oklahoma.
Ouch.
Home against K-State. Home against TCU, at Texas.
Ouch.
That's tough. And that's going to be that Texas day after Thanksgiving game. So that's I hate to do that to the Bears, but I don't know. I mean, like, depending on what happens next week, if they beat Oklahoma, K-State goes into Waco, that's going to be a game that still has some juice, because if Baylor wins, like, that's again a battle for second place in the league and trying to be on track for Arlington. I really think the thing that's going to doom Baylor, though, is like, you can't lose to West Virginia, because the conversation on them is totally different if they don't have that loss to West Virginia. Instead, they do. And so you're behind the 8 ball. That's another thing why K-State's win was so big yesterday. Like, even with 2 losses, yes, you're still in the race for that second spot in Arlington, but now you have the extra advantage on Oklahoma State because you have the tiebreaker. And so now what you need is to either beating Texas would be the most ideal situation. But even at that point, like, Texas is already sitting with 2 losses in conference play, and Texas still has to play TCU this year. So they will go K-State, then TCU, followed up by a road trip to Kansas and then Baylor. So they've got a tough road ahead as well. So there are some things that are starting to line up to where this works out nicely for K-State, but we'll see how they do next week against the Longhorns. So just some of those notes.
Yeah, I thought that I just don't want people to write off Baylor. I know that those last 4 games are really tough, but yeah, I just feel like that they're still kind of in the contention, and they're a well-coached team. It looks like compared to what they were earlier in the season, they've cleaned a lot of things up. They're definitely still in contention.
Big 12 standings now. Everybody has played 5 games in the league, so they will all play 4 games over the next 4 weeks. TCU 5-0 in Big 12 play, and then K-State 4-1. So those would be your 2 teams in Arlington right now. Oklahoma State, Baylor, and Texas all at 3-2. But to keep track, Oklahoma State, they're out of the chances of Arlington basically, unless something crazy happens, because they have losses to TCU and K-State. That sets them back. And they still have to play Oklahoma on the road this year, which I don't think they do. They do well in that. And then OU, KU, and Texas Tech are all 2-3. West Virginia is 1-4, and Iowa State is 0-5. West Virginia goes to Ames next weekend. You got any early indication of what you think in that game?
I'll take Iowa State.
I'm going Iowa State as well. I think because if they're going to win a Big 12 game this year, it kind of has to be that one now, based off of everything that's gone past you. So that's a look at the Big 12. One final thing before we go out. We are recording this just an hour over an hour away from kickoff between my Cowboys and Alec's Bears. They will be playing today in Arlington. Alec needed his sleep. He didn't want to go down to the game this morning.
I told you earlier this week I was down to go after Justin Fields looked like the NFL MVP last week.
Yeah, and I was going to give you an avenue to where we still could have. You should have said something. But we decided that there needs to be something on the line for this game to kind of keep people entertained. And one of the hot topics that Alec brought up earlier this year was that Adrian Martinez last season, you can explain the story better than I can. He tried blending up a steak and eating it when he had a broken jaw. So he had like a steak shake, basically. We have decided that whoever's team loses in our bet today, the loser, they will have to try the Adrian Martinez steak shake.
Yeah, so the story behind this is Adrian Martinez has a broken jaw last year at Nebraska, and it's a thing at Nebraska. Their team meal is generally always steak. I forget if it's before the game or after the game, whatever. It kind of makes sense that it's steak at Nebraska, but he actually couldn't chew a lot of things because he has the broken jaw, and he asked the team chefs or cooking staff to, I guess, like you said, turn steak into a shake. And that rhymes. And that was going to be how he was going to have the team meal with the rest of his teammates. And he was telling me earlier this year that he mixed it with Aju sauce, that sauce that you put on steak to add a good amount of flavor or whatever. And he said I should try it. So we're going to put this on the line. We're going to put this on the Emo Online podcast. The winner of Dallas and Chicago. Now, I am getting the 10 points because the line is 10 points. You conveniently didn't mention that in your spiel here.
Oh, no, I was going to get to it.
Oh, okay.
The Cowboys are 10-point favorites.
So my Bears are
doesn't
10-point
actually
dog
believe in
on
the
the road in
Bears.
Dallas.
Doesn't actually believe in the Bears. So
no, hell no, I don't believe in the Bears. Are you kidding me? They're the worst roster in the NFL, and they just traded their best pass rusher.
Cowboys have to win by 11 points. What happens? Do we both have to try it if it's a 10-point game?
Sure. I was gonna say neither of us have to try it, but sure. I think it might be more fun if we both.
I think we're both losers in that situation. So yeah, okay. We both will try it then if we get into that situation. If the Cowboys only win by 10, which, as people know, 10, that's kind of a popular thing that happens in football when you deal with 7s and 3s. Here's the line out of the Athletic story. Martinez couldn't chew food and didn't eat much that week. His girlfriend drove up to take care of him. I lost 5 or 6 pounds. My face was all swollen. I was calling her, barely able to talk. She was really worried about me. He adjusted to an all-liquid diet before settling on a routine heavy on eggs and protein shakes. He tried blending a steak and consuming it like oatmeal. It was one of the worst things he's ever eaten. He tried again, adding au jus and olives to the recipe. Didn't help, but he had to keep his weight up. So
I will say, doing this, if the Bears don't cover this, I'm gonna be spending a good amount of money. One, I don't own a blender, so I'm gonna need to go buy that, and then I'm also gonna need to buy steak, and I'm gonna need to learn how to cook a steak in the oven or on the stove.
No, it's pretty easy on the stove. That you'll be good there.
I'm good at chicken on the stove, but steak's obviously a little bit.
And honestly, I don't know. We may get creative with it. Maybe instead of blending it, if we don't know how to do that or something, we can find a better way. So when we're on the road at Waco, we got good steakhouses in Texas. So I may just whip something up at a table for you.
Steakhouse and ask them, can you blend this?
Here you go. Yeah.
Can
they're
you
how would you like your steak cooked? Blended is how I would take it. So. All right, that will do it for us. We've been in here long enough, covered a wide variety of topics. We'll be back in the middle of the week to not only go over football, but we'll also talk some basketball because the Cats are starting off their season with their exhibition game against Washburn on Tuesday. Monday in the afternoon, we will have our first chance to talk to the Cats in season as they will have their first press conference. So Jerome Tang, some of the players that will be available. All of that coming your way, so stay tuned for everything over at EMA Online on Rivals, or you can follow us on Twitter at EMA Online, and also find EMA Online on YouTube for all the videos for press conferences, and you can also find the video version of the podcast, and Wildcat Weekly with Deuce Vaughn each and every week is up there as well. So that'll do it for Alec and I. Cats get a big one, 48-0. They are now in the driver's seat for second place in the Big 12 in a trip to Arlington, but they got to fight off the Texas Longhorns next weekend in Manhattan.